Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and welcome to part 2 of our exploration of Asian horror films released in 2015. Yes, I'm finally ready to knock out this year, as I've seen the remaining titles that I really needed to see from 2015. Now, when looking at the distribution of films in this year, I think it makes more sense to do a 4-part video. We've already covered most of the dumpster juice back in part 1, and this part 2 video that we're doing here tonight, or today, will cover the decent stuff that could be watchable for certain viewers. Then part 3 will cover the good stuff, and then part 4 will cover my personal favorites from this year. So I'm hoping to finish this year in review over the next few months, and then we could do some additional addendum videos related to prior years while I finish tracking down those remaining Asian horror films from 2016 that I have yet to see before tackling that year. So let's get to it. And remember, titles for all the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. The Doll, Mongolian horror film, of course, from 2015. So the film opens with a bus accident, then moves back in time 3 days. A young woman visits her ill mother in the hospital and then goes to a coffee shop for a rest. But she notices a crazy-looking street drifter outside of the window with an extremely ugly, creepy doll in his hands. So, of course, she brings the doll home with her, despite the fact that she obviously is uncomfortable with it. The doll has a hunger for blood, one that will be served at any cost, one life at a time. Now, this is not to be confused with the Indonesian horror film of the same name from 2016, called The Doll. But we'll cover that one later in this playlist. The lead actress here is pretty likable, albeit unexceptional in her performance. Her character is very unhappy in life, and that does eventually play into the story and conflict because the doll can grant wishes if you feed it your blood. Now, the street drifter's appearance is unintentionally funny, and there are a few more scenes in the film that are kind of goofy, like the scenes when the doll is played by a human. But this movie takes itself seriously for the most part, and although it's nothing amazing, it works okay, because it does make a legitimate attempt to craft a story. At the very least, this movie succeeds at creating motivation for our protagonist to ask for these wishes from the doll. She's having financial difficulties, she's being harassed by her boss, etc., and the pressures of life can push you to doing some immoral things. Of course, the wishes are not fulfilled quite like our protagonist expects, but they are fulfilled nevertheless. Kind of interesting how they play out. The little doll, pretty creepy looking, but they only show it a small handful of times. This is a slower moving affair that has a few pacing issues, and I would say the ending is kind of lame as well, but it's actually pretty good overall in my opinion. Pretty good. Now, The Doll is available on Asian Crush for viewing. Alright, our next 2 films were pretty expensive blind buys for me, so most of you won't even bother with them. But like I always say, even if you're not planning on watching a few of these movies that I cover, it's always nice to know what Japan is producing, even on the direct-to-video market. And here we have the excellently titled Halloween Nightmare from 2015, of course. This is Japanese horror. Saki lands a job in the publishing industry, which she always wanted, but she is assigned in the editorial department of an occult magazine rather than a fashion magazine. One day, the magazine plans for a special article on Halloween. Saki knows that a bizarre, unsolved murder case occurs on Halloween night every year. And for the special article, Saki begins to investigate the unsolved case. So yeah, it was an expensive blind buy, but I had to do it. Halloween Nightmare just screams to be viewed by me. Now, this does have a pretty cool intro scene involving our villain, who emerges from black smoke. He has a pumpkin head, and he wears a purple suit and carries an axe, which is pretty damn cool. He also uses a neat ability to isolate his victims so they can never be safe. The lead actress is actually pretty good in this, especially when you consider the fact that this was direct-to-video. Sound design, surprisingly effective in spots. There are also a few creepy moments. This is a low-budget affair, however, and there are quite a few investigation and dialogue scenes to kind of pad things out, which does create a pacing problem during the opening half hour because English subtitles are currently not available for the film. But for all I know, it was a decent story. But with a runtime of only 74 minutes, and just enough screen time for our villain, this is watchable fluff if you're in a forgiving mood. But still, it's not worth the high price tag for the Japanese DVD. If it does become available for streaming at some point in the future on like Amazon or Asian Crush or something like that, you may want to check it out. It's not bad. And again, like I said, availability, it's only available on Region 2 Japanese DVD without subtitles. Now, we have to cover the sequel, of course. And I already covered these on my DVD collection playlist or Asian movie collection playlist, if you follow me on that playlist. But, yeah, we have to cover the sequel, even though it's not particularly good. Halloween Nightmare 2, released the same year. Now, a high school student named Nanami lives in Tokyo. She waits for Halloween because she enjoys dressing up in costumes with her friends. One day, Nanami's father tells her about a mysterious serial murder case that takes place every year on Halloween. How do people not know about this? Shouldn't the whole country know about this? Anyway, her father works as a chief editor at an occult magazine. At first, Nanami doesn't care about the serial murders, but frightening incidents keep taking place around her. Now, the original film, as I said, wasn't anything that great, but this sequel is a huge downgrade, right from the start. I mean, the opening scene is weak and barely shows the villain at all, and that will be a theme, by the way. The schoolgirls are annoying and whiny. At least they play a kind of an odd game called Toss the Pumpkin in an attempt to distract us from their grating voices and personalities. Now, the lead actress is pretty gorgeous in this, but not as likable as the actress from the prior film. In terms of horror, there's one creepy image early on in a bathroom stall, but all of the other horror scenes in this movie are just crap. They even use some fake scares, and then there's a lame stalker element that seems introduced for the purposes of saving on makeup costs for the Pumpkin Man, who is in the film for possibly 1 minute. I kid you not, the villain is in the film for 1 minute. And it's completely unacceptable, since he's the main reason why anyone would even watch this movie to begin with. It's only 61 minutes long, but it still drags badly, and has tons of dull-as-dirt filler. This film is unbearably boring, with scenes of girls doing stupid stuff that has nothing to do with the horrific premise. So Halloween Nightmare 2 is pretty much a steaming pile of crap, and it's obvious that the filmmakers put no effort into it. And my guess is that the first film maybe did pretty well on the DVD market, so they spat out a quickie sequel later the same year. So do not watch this, even if it becomes available. DVD availability, just like the original at this time, Japanese Region 2 DVD without subtitles. Now, the reason why I didn't cover this in Part 1 is because it doesn't make sense to cover Part 2 of a movie when you haven't covered Part 1 yet. So, yeah, this is a crap film that we're going to cover in this video, or that we did cover. So let's move on. Let's go to South Korea for the next one. The Chosen Forbidden Cave, also known as Exorcist. Jin Young is a psychiatrist and exorcist, together with his assistant, Ji Kwang. He is traveling around in South Korea and helps the victims of demonic possession. His latest mission is to cure Gyomju, who terrorizes her environment against her will, but without the usual signs of demonic possession. Now, even Jin Young fails to help her at first, so he decides to take some research, leads him to a forbidden cave that is the origin of some dark secrets and legends. So this begins with a not-too-good cheap jump scare at the start, but it immediately cuts to a classroom where the psychiatrist is attempting to explain this bizarre event as some kind of spiritual sickness, which is kind of interesting. Fortunately, the horror scenes that follow the opening set piece have better execution overall. There's nothing new here. There are some cliches and jump scares present, but it is moderately creepy at times. There's a car accident early on. It's pretty crazy, because the driver had no chance of survival. When you see what happens in that scene, you're like, yeah, if I was in that situation, I'd be dead too. And in a supernatural horror film, that's nice to see, because it tells you that the bad spirits aren't messing around. There are a few brief CGI shots that are not good, but they're pretty short. The spirit here is a bit different from a typical Japanese onryo ghost, when it takes human form and has silver hair and red eyes, which I kind of liked. The backstory is run-of-the-mill, not especially interesting, but it's not bad or anything either. It's just okay. I like the score in this. The music is good. Direction and acting are pretty good. The actress from A Bloody Aria and Whispering Corridors 4 voice is in this. Yi Ryun Cha. I always like seeing her, so it's nice to see her in this. So overall, The Chosen Forbidden Cave is pretty basic stuff, but it's a pretty good quality overall. There's nothing here that excites me, but it's also not bad. It's a watchable film. It's part 2. It's a part 2 video, right? These are the types of films I cover in part 2 in this playlist for these. And it is available on Asian Crush for viewing, if you want to check it out. Alright, now it's time to review a Koji Shiraishi film. We've looked at a ton of this man's films in this playlist, and let's cover another one. Senritsu Kaiki File, Cho Kowasugi File 1. This is a horror film, of course, from Japan. So Shiraishi begins his second film series of documentary-style horror films that focus on Japanese legends. Now this installment concerns Kokuri, which is a Japanese summoning game that is similar in some ways to a Ouija board. And 2 girls play this game at an abandoned school in the middle of the night, and, as expected, something strange happens. Now we still have one film yet to cover from Shiraishi's first Senritsu Kaiki File series. Well, that film will be covered in a later video. This Cho Kowasugi film is the first in his new film series, just to make that clear. Now, the 2 protagonists from the previous film series return to investigate events in this series, so that's good. They're pretty likable. They show up at the start, seem to explain their return for prior events, and the main dude gets mad and starts yelling, which is always entertaining. This actor, he reminds me a little bit of Beat Takeshi when he gets pissed off, and that's a good thing. Then we get a lengthy horror sequence that's a bit unnerving. It's shot with night vision. I'm pretty receptive to scenes like this when they're done well, and I think this one's done fairly well. But still, the scene does feel a little bit drawn out. It takes a little bit too long to get going. Then, it switches to a dialogue-heavy middle section before returning to a lengthy horror sequence during the final third. Parts in the middle section are interesting because they do a presentation on the Kokori-san legend and they research it. Sound design is creepy, and there are some very long takes without edits, which is always commendable. That's common for Shiraishi's films in this series. And there are a few funny bits as well, mostly involving the bitchy girlfriend, or friend of one of the protagonists. The ending is actually quite funny as well. So if we consider the first series of films, of which there were 7, this first film in the new series is pretty conventional, because it's not nearly as weird as some of the prior stuff that Shiraishi has done from recent years. But there are still a few oddball moments, and I feel like this is almost like a back-to-basics entry for Shiraishi, because the first Senritsu Kaiki File series got pretty outlandish during the later segments. So it's almost like him resetting things and getting back to basics. But it does lay the groundwork for a better sequel that came out the same year, which we will cover, of course. Pretty good stuff. It's only 81 minutes long. Again, availability for these films, not widely available with subtitles. You're going to have to do the Region 2 Japanese DVD without subs, unfortunately. All right. Now, the rest of the films we're covering tonight are available pretty readily. And they are also, I believe, a step above the films that we've covered so far. So I enjoyed our next batch of films a little bit more than the ones we've already covered. In fact, a few of them I feel are a bit underrated. All right, Ghost Theater. This is a Japanese horror film. This movie opens with a mannequin in a girl's room, and it apparently kills her with a kiss. The father decides to dismember the mannequin, but he hesitates because he's in love with it. Fortunately, he works up the courage and chops it up. He's about to set it on fire as well, but the cops show up and take him away. We then cut to our main characters for the story. While rehearsing for a stage play, the cast and crew are troubled by strange events that are connected to this mannequin that reappears. Alright? Hideo Nakata directed this. He's one of those directors who gets a lot of attention for directing Ring and Dark Water, but few people really pay attention to the rest of his filmography. In my opinion, it's hit and miss, alright? You have some good stuff in there like Chaos, Kaiden, and even The Complex I enjoyed, but that's mixed in with some crap like L Change the World and The Insight Mill. Ghost Theater is somewhere in the middle. I think it's moderately entertaining stuff. Now, this is a soft reimagining, I guess you could say, of Nakata's prior film, Don't Look Up, also known as Ghost Actress from 1996, which I believe I covered earlier in this playlist. But this one turned out to be actually a very different film when you compare them. This is essentially a mannequin horror film, not a ghost film, okay? Even though it's called Ghost Theater. Some people really hate on this movie, probably because it's kind of goofy and not very scary at all. I think a lot of moviegoers nowadays really dislike spookiness, which is very different from scariness. I love spooky stuff, if it's entertaining. Maybe it's because Halloween is my favorite holiday, and I grew up around Halloween decorations that could be considered pretty cheesy. And that's essentially what spooky is. It's horror with a little sprinkling of cheese. A lot of classic horror films have this feel, which is why a lot of people are not receptive to older horror films. And a bunch of Japanese horror films also have this vibe to them. And I've covered a bunch of them in this playlist. Stuff like the Kazuo Umezu manga horror theater project, which I assume a lot of people wouldn't like because they're kind of goofy and spooky and cheesy, right? So Ghost Theater kind of has that vibe to it a little bit. But if you're not going to be scary as a film, you need to contribute something else also to make up for it. I don't need all of my horror films to be scary. I need them to hold my interest. I don't care how they do it. And I think Ghost Theater does hold my interest. Now, I'm generally receptive to movies involving dolls and mannequins. There's something about the stillness of it and the idea that something supernatural is trapped inside. Now, thankfully, there are quite a bit of mannequin shots in this film. And the mannequin here does look pretty realistic. If you saw it, like from a little bit of a distance, you would think that it's an actual person. Sound design is pretty cool. I like the creaky noises that the mannequin makes when it walks. It's really accentuated. You can really hear like the plastic joints like rubbing and cracking against one another. I thought that was really good. I like that. The film looks nice. It's visually pleasing and has a good use of color, both in the form of lighting and sets. Storytelling is pretty predictable, and it incorporates plot points you see all the time in the subgenre. So there's nothing new here, okay? Performances in general are pretty underwhelming as well. They have some like J-pop stars in this, and they bring the film down a notch. I think a stronger cast of lead actors would have, definitely upgraded this. Content-wise, there's really nothing here that's particularly impressive. Scare tactics, kind of a mixed bag. They range from good to mediocre, with the spookiest scenes near the end. The movement of the mannequin, I think, is handled actually pretty well in this. Mostly practical effects that are accentuated at times with a bit of CGI. And I think the reliance on practical effects here was good and important. It was a good decision. There are a few shots during the finale I think are pretty freaky. I found it pretty satisfying. Overall, I enjoyed Ghost Theater, despite some of its flaws. It's not a popular opinion, since a lot of people seem to hate on this, but it's a movie you watch more for its visuals and its aesthetic than really anything else. Again, kind of a spooky film, not a scary film, but I found it very easy to sit through. I find this film very easy to sit through, so that's my take on it. Now, availability on this is that it is available on Region 3 DVD with subtitles. Alright, our next film, I believe, is from mainland China. That is called The Strange House. Now, a man sees a young girl in the street and notices that she bears a striking resemblance to his niece, who passed away recently. He requests that the girl pretend to be the dead niece in order to appease an ailing grandmother who wants to see her granddaughter again. So this old lady apparently did not know that her granddaughter died. Now, when faced with financial difficulties, our protagonist actually agrees to do this. Unfortunately, our protagonist also begins experiencing horrific visions while visiting this house. So essentially, the premise is a more horrific version of Ad Lib Night, the Korean film from 2006 that I talked about in my Asian movie collection playlist. Basically the same exact premise, only this is a horror film. So, kind of an interesting start. The Strange House was directed by Danny Pang, and I must say that it's one of his better solo efforts. I think when I think of the Pang brothers, Oxide has always been the better solo director in my eyes, but Danny does a good job with this one. Direction and acting are very good in this. Our protagonist, the young girl, has a bit of spunk to her because she's initially confronted by this guy to propose her this situation, and she runs through traffic to lose him, and then she knocks him to the ground when she sees him again. So I like having a spunky lead in a movie. It's pretty good. There are some nice shots in the nearby lake that are atmospheric. This movie is visually engaging and has some impressive sound design. Now, the twists in this movie have been done before. So much so, you might roll your eyes at them. But I would say that the process of getting to the end, the mystery itself, is pretty engaging, and it holds my interest. There's a lot of human conflict in this, which helps. Not many ghost scenes at all in this movie, very few. It's more psychological. Now, it is a horror film from mainland China, so that's no surprise if you're familiar with how the industry works. They tend to not like supernatural elements in their horror films, but sometimes the psychological angle can actually add to the film, and I think it does in this case. Scare tactics are typical stuff. There are a few jump scares and camera tricks, but there are also a few creepy moments as well. The reason to watch this movie are the story and the human conflicts, which carry things, and I think it's pretty good. Availability, just like Ghost Theater, this is available on Region 3 DVD with subtitles. Good one from Danny Pang. In fact, when I was writing up this video, I was thinking, that might be a good video for me to do. A Danny Pang versus Oxide Pang. Just kind of like assessment. And just see why I prefer Oxide to Danny as a solo director. So I might do that at some point in the future. Now we finish off this video with one of the high-profile films from Japan in recent years. Not highly acclaimed, but high-profile. It got a lot of attention when it was released. And that is, of course, Attack on Titan, the movie, a sci-fi horror action flick. Based on the manga of the same name, a medieval-like world of humans has become almost completely extinct due to the arrival of bloodthirsty, vicious, humanoid giants. The remaining survivors live in a walled-off kingdom and attempt to fight back before their impending extinction is realized. The related anime adaptation is hugely popular at the moment, and quite excellent. So it was a tall order to make a film that could create the same level of quality and excitement. Well, they failed to accomplish that goal with this movie. Apparently, and this blew my mind when I read this, Tatsuya Nakashima was originally hired to direct these films. The guy who gave us Confessions, like one of the best films of the last decade. But he left the project due to creative differences. So can you even imagine how awesome this movie would have been with him at the helm, having at least some creative control? I want to see that. But we'll never know how it would have turned out, unfortunately. But still, there are some things that I like about this live-action adaptation. Okay, first and foremost, the Titans look pretty damn good. They actually look good, and they represent some of the better special effects to come out of Japan in recent years. I think they did a good job of blending the humanoid characteristics of the monsters, which, in my opinion, probably made it a little bit easier for them from a monster design standpoint, because you can actually probably just capture humans, film human beings, and kind of digitally like replace them or use makeup, you know what I mean, and have them have that kind of aesthetic there without having to do a fully CGI entity. I'm not sure how they did this in production or post-production, but I think it works. However they did it, they pulled it off. I think that the rappel line sequences, the I don't know, I forgot what they call it, the multi-dimensional gear, whatever they call it, where they shoot the rappel lines and then they fly. I think those were less impressive and occasionally cartoonish, but still effective enough. And the maneuvering gear is pretty well realized. And that was actually the most concerning thing I had going into this movie. How were they going to pull that off? And the Titans, they nailed. The rappel line gear, not so much, but it's not horrible. Now, this is a horror film with bloody violence and a menacing tone throughout. This is no doubt due to the monster design of the Titans, right? Which are ghastly and almost zombie-like. Also, some of the human death scenes are pretty entertaining to watch. One of the best Titan Rampage set pieces occurs during the opening half hour, and it's very lengthy and very entertaining. During the middle section, there's a giant Titan baby that's revealed at nighttime. It's pretty creepy. And soon after that, there's a mobility gear fight that works, but it's pretty short in length. And then we get more Titan attacks during the final half hour, and the big finale satisfies. I like the finale to this film. So this is essentially, and this is one of the main reasons why I like this movie, it's a kaiju film that's a horror film, and you don't get that many of those. I mean, it's not even horrific in theme, like the first Godzilla film. This is legit horror. And I get a lot of entertainment out of that aspect of this movie. Now, the drama and the script writing, on the other hand, is pretty bad. It's easily the weakest element of the movie and serves to be only as kind of like a bleak filler between the horror scenes. The characters are bland. Most of the dialogue is just exposition dumps. I mean, we get boring conversations involving characters who are just sitting around all the time. There is no sense of urgency at all in this movie in between the Titan attacks. That means that the viewer will likely be just, twiddling their thumbs, fidgeting in their seat until the next Titan attack comes. The story here severely lacks the momentum of the anime series, and there's really not a whole lot that's interesting from a script writing standpoint. Also, a few of the characters are not faithful in how they're portrayed when compared to the source material. Now, I have not read the manga, but I have seen the anime series through half of Season 3, so I haven't finished Season 3 yet. But from what I know of the characters, some of their depictions here aren't very good. I think it would have been better, I think, to make this movie work, and they were close to making it great or really good, is you just, you have the characters run around a little bit more in between the Titan attacks. You have them plan more. Plan counterattacks. Don't worry about necessarily following the anime, because you can't, given the short runtime anyways. You got the Titans down. All you got to do is make the characters, have more of a sense of urgency between the attacks. Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to fight them? Have a strategy. And it doesn't cost any more money outside of the Titan attacks to just write scenes with characters that are really having a sense of urgency. So I think that's where this film really, really failed. Performances are pretty average. Rina Takeda, the karate expert, has a supporting role, but she's wasted. Japan does typically waste her in movies, which really irritates me. The brief runtime of 99 minutes makes it a relatively easy sit, despite some of the boring filler material. And there's more than enough Titan action to keep one satisfied. So, again, not a popular opinion. This is a video of unpopular opinions, but I liked this live-action depiction, even though it's a huge step down from the anime. Alright, unfortunately we need to end this video with a review of the sequel, Attack on Titan 2, End of the World. And again, this movie pretty much sucks, but I couldn't review it in part 1 of this video because I hadn't reviewed the original film yet. So, I'll breeze through this pretty fast. The sequel, okay, picks up right from the end of the first film. Has a decent opening 20 or so minutes, with a good scene involving the white-haired Titan, or a white-haired Titan. And there's too much dull filler, though, in the middle section. So, when you start the film, you're like, okay, this isn't too bad. And then you have this middle section that's pretty freaking boring. And that exposes the weak script writing and dialogue again. Just like the first live-action film, the conversations in this movie are just boring to watch. There's an exposition dump fairly early on, which takes place in like a white room, and it just stalls the freaking movie. Just stalls it. Again, there's no sense of urgency here whatsoever for the characters. Even when the characters venture outside the walls and they're in Titan territory, just sit around and have boring conversations all the time. Like, what are we doing here? Mikasa has no personality in this movie. It was kind of a problem in the first one, but it's even worse here. I mean, she just looks scared and intimidated the whole time. It's just like it's disrespectful to her character. Even worse, this is less of a horror film than its predecessor because it opts to focus on the human conflict stuff instead of the giant monsters, which is a big no-no. I mean, at least the last film had enough Titan activity to be watchable. This is kind of a dumpster fire because it's a different story. The Titan action during the last half hour of this sequel is pretty good. It's pretty good, but it's not as good as the stuff from the prior film. And it's not worth the wait because the finale itself in this film is just not that satisfying. It just feels like a contrived cop-out. Things are resolved a bit too easily, in my opinion. So we get all of these flaws from the last film that are carried over into this one with worst pacing and unsatisfying genre elements. So I cannot recommend the sequel. Now, obviously, if you watch the first live-action film and you actually like it like me, you're going to watch this because you want to see how it ends. So, unfortunately, you're kind of stuck with kind of a mixed bag if you decide to watch these. But, again, I did like the first live-action film. Now, this one and the first live-action film are available on Amazon Instant, okay, in the United States. So, hey, they're available. There are a few bucks to rent them, I think, if you have a Prime account like I do. So there you have it. All right, that's part 2 of our journey through Asian horror films released in 2015. Now, again, I have some unpopular opinions in this. Some people might not want to watch any of these. But, I think, some people like Chosen the Forbidden Cave more than I do. And, anything from Koji Shiraishi. If you like Koji Shiraishi's direct-to-video stuff, you're going to watch these, right? So that's there for you. The Kowasugi File 1. And then, you got Ghost Theater, which gets trashed online pretty consistently. But I think it's pretty watchable. Strange House, I think, is Danny Pang's probably one of his better solo outings. And the first Attack on Titan live-action film, I think, is pretty watchable. But again, in this video, this part 2 video, you got to be careful. It's a minefield of films that you might hate. So, tread with caution. All right? So we will cover part 3 within the next month. And part 4 will come soon after that. So we'll knock out this year in Asian horror, and then we'll move on from there as necessary. And as always, I'll see you next time.